So we've identified that there are different ways or different degrees to which a person can dedicate themselves to Hashem, which is compared to the principle of whether or not you can sell something that does not yet exist, or whether you can transact with something that doesn't yet exist. So we said, if I'm talking about a tree and fruit, I'm not permitted, it's not binding, let's put it that way, if I make a transaction about the fruit, if the fruit have not yet begun to grow. Whereas, if I make a transaction that says, the tree belongs to you, to the extent that you can take the fruit, that actually is binding. We associated that with different spiritual states. The ordinary person, us, plebs, so we are not at a level of absolute dedication to Hashem. What we're trying to do is dedicate our fruit, our produce to Hashem, which means we're trying to make sure that we're doing the right things, and even saying the right things, and even thinking the right things. But because the core of our being is not absolutely aligned with Hashem, we have our own self-interest, we have our temptations and distractions, there's absolutely no guarantee that just because we say that we're going to behave in a particular way, that we actually will behave in a particular way. And so therefore, there's really no guarantee, apparently, that if I make a resolution, I make a commitment, that it's actually going to stick. Because who knows? If it's not where I'm at, if it's not seeped, if it hasn't seeped through to every fiber of my being, I don't know that it's going to translate into the kind of behavior that I need when I promise to have that behavior. Whereas, if I was somebody who was absolutely dedicated to Hashem, right to the core of who I am, which is essentially a tzaddik, then I would say the tree already belongs to Hashem, meaning the core, the whole entity belongs to Hashem. And in that case, it's pretty natural that whatever the tree produces is going to be aligned with what Hashem wants. And that's the reality of a tzaddik. A tzaddik is somebody you don't have to guess. You are guaranteed exactly 100% of the time how they're going to behave, and that it's going to be exactly what Hashem wants. That's why tzaddik not only behave, but even think, and even impulsive thinking. So that's why tzaddik is in a very unique category. In the book of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe will speak about the tzaddik as an Eved Hashem, a servant of Hashem. And he goes into this kind of detail, that there's a big difference between referring to somebody with an adjective versus describing a person in a verb. In other words, let's say that a person would say that they are losing weight, as opposed to saying to somebody, you are thin. Okay, difference. So the adjective describes where the person is, that's become a title, an achievement, that's the state that they're in. Whereas a verb describes a process, and the process may still be in the middle of the process, might even be right at the beginning of the process. So for example, you could say that somebody is a chacham. That means that they deserve the adjective wisdom. They've already mastered a great degree of wisdom. Or we could say that there's somebody who is mischakem, which means they are developing wisdom, either by learning or by having life experience or by contemplating certain ideas. So they're building their reservoir of wisdom, but you wouldn't yet call them wise. In the same way, you could speak about an Oved Hashem, which means somebody who is in the process of serving Hashem. That means that they're still working on this, as opposed to an Eved, which is a title. That means that the person has already mastered this, and their being is a servant of Hashem. So a tzaddik is called an Eved. It's called somebody who's already mastered the art of serving Hashem. Because the person has already mastered the art of serving Hashem, well, halachically is a very interesting definition of what an Eved is. I think we actually touched on this. We did touch on this previously, where the difference between somebody who is an employee versus somebody who is a servant reflects in multiple areas. We're going to look at one area. So if you're on the job and you have a contract, or you're paid a salary, or whatever the case is, and you're working for a person, let's just say 9 to 5. And let's just say that the particular job that you're doing, strange example, but it will just fit the story. Let's say that you are the courier for the company. So you're out and about and you're all over the place throughout the course of the day. Now, if you are the courier, are you allowed, for example, to use the company car on your way to the delivery to take a little joyride and, maybe play Uber on the side? While you're couriering, are you allowed to Uber people to similar locations? Okay, it'd be an interesting legal discussion that you'd have to have. The likelihood is it's not exactly honest. You're being paid by the company using their car, their petrol to get from point A to point B. Doesn't sound right that you should be allowed to be making a little bit of money on the side from assets that don't belong to you. However, if while you're driving, you get to a particular destination and you go deliver the parcel, right outside the building, lying on the side of the road, is a whole lot of cash. And it's just in a nondescript bag, and it doesn't have any identifying signs that you could trace back to whoever may have lost this money. The reason I'm using that example is because then halachically you're allowed to take the money. The question is, you're on the job. You're currently employed by somebody else. So you can't make money off Ubering with their car. Are you allowed to take the cash that you find on the side of the road? And the halacha is, yes, of course you can. They don't own you. They've contracted you to do a job for a particular amount of time. As long as you're doing your job, as long as it's not going to detract from your job, there's no cost to the company, so you could take the money. Whereas, if somebody would be an eved essentially means a slave, even though slave is a very jarring word for us and it brings up all kinds of negative connotations. But an eved is essentially a slave. And, halachically, if an eved does anything, it is automatically, without hesitation, as if the master over that slave had done that thing, which means that if an eved is walking in the street and sees cash lying on the street and picks up that cash, that is as good as if the master had picked up the cash. So it's not even an illegal question, does it belong to him or not? Is he allowed to take it or not? Doesn't even get to that point, because at that moment he's considered as an extension of the master. So as soon as he picks up the money, it's as good as if the master had picked up the money. Therefore, when we describe a tzaddik as an eved, as a servant of Hashem, that's the degree of commitment that we're talking about, the degree of connection. It's not like a tzaddik does things for Hashem, like we do. It's that whatever the tzaddik does is essentially an extension of Hashem operating in that space at that time. The tzaddik is the prosthesis of Hashem. That's what's happening. So there is no personal interest, and therefore it's natural that whatever the tzaddik is going to do will obviously be aligned with what Hashem wants. So if a tzaddik makes a spiritual commitment, a resolution, we don't even have to bat an eyelid. We know 100% without fail that that resolution is going to come to fruition. We're not so reliable, right? Ordinary people, we're not so reliable, which really brings up a big dilemma for us. How can we make a resolution? Because what happens? We get inspired, or whatever the inspiration might be, whatever the catalyst is, we get inspired. Based on that inspiration, we feel in the now that we're capable of doing something, committing to something, stopping a particular inappropriate behavior. And we believe, which here's the flaw in our thinking, we believe that the way I feel now is going to persist. And so therefore, as enthusiastic as I am now about the commitment, that's how enthusiastic I can imagine that I'll be in the future about the commitment, which is false. It's never going to be that way. We know it's not going to be that way. So how can we ever make a resolution? Surely we're taking high risks every time we promise that we're going to do something in our spiritual development, because ultimately there are no guarantees. In fact, to the contrary, there's a pretty high likelihood that we're going to get this thing wrong. So, and we're not an eved. We're not absolutely dedicated to Hashem. We're not as if we're Hashem's extension. So how can we, maybe we shouldn't be doing these things. Maybe we should not be making promises. One of the things that's discussed in the parasha this week is people making pledges. So maybe we shouldn't make pledges because it's too dangerous. And we know people, I think we all know people who say, I'd rather not make the promise because I'm too afraid of letting myself down again. Because we all have experience where this has happened to us previously. So we don't want to get mixed up in this mess again. So honestly, we are not at that level of eved. We are not at that level of complete dedication to Hashem to the extent that we literally belong to Hashem. However, we are all of us shluchim. Every one of us has the status of a shliach. A shliach is an agent, a proxy, a representative of Hashem. And that's whether we like it or not. We are Hashem's representative. Occasionally, people remind us, whether we like it or not, they remind us of who we are, that we are representatives of Hashem. Occasionally, we remind ourselves because we're afraid that if we do something, perhaps it will reflect badly on the entire Jewish people. Or perhaps if another Jew has done something, we get frustrated because it gives all Jews a bad name. So we recognize the fact that we are shluchim, we are representatives, we're agents, we're proxies of Hashem, we are the representatives. Now, there's a very interesting span or a very interesting range of laws that apply to the concept of a shliach. So let's use an example. Let's say that I ask you to be my shaliach, to be my representative, to do something that I am required to do. So, a simple example, let's say that I'm required to, in the old days, I was required to take a portion of my produce and to give it to the Kohen or to the Levi, right? Truma and Meiser. We still do Truma and Meiser in Israel today, but it's as a token. We don't actually give it to the Kohen and the Levi. So in the old days, you had to give a certain portion of your produce to the Kohen and a certain portion of your produce to the Levi. So you appoint somebody. So you're going to be my shliach. I've got this big farm. I don't want to have the headache of going around and measuring out the amounts, etc., and delivering it to the Kohen. So you're going to be my person to do that. So the first thing we know is, number one, the question is, can I do a mitzvah via somebody else? Because if you think about it, surely if it's a mitzvah for me to perform, surely I have to do it. You can't outsource mitzvahs. For example, you can't outsource putting on tefillin. Imagine you say, I'm going to pay you, and you put on tefillin for me every day. It'd be ridiculous. You can't do that. So many, if not most mitzvahs, cannot be outsourced. But there are certain situations where you can appoint somebody to be your agent like this. You can appoint somebody to be your agent to take X amount of your produce and hand it over to the Kohen, hand it over to the Levi, and now it's considered as not as if they have fulfilled their mitzvah, it's considered as if you have fulfilled your mitzvah. Why is that? Because we have a principle which is called Shluchoi Shel Adam Kemoisoi, that when a person is your agent, they are legally considered in that activity as if it was you. Okay? Here's an even stronger example. What happens if a guy gives a ring to another guy, says, travel to another country, go to a woman in that country, put the ring on her finger in front of two witnesses, and say, with this ring, you are betrothed to Yankel, who's back in the original country. So it sounds strange, right? Because surely something as meaningful and romantic and intimate like marriage should require face-to-face encounter. And yet, the halacha is, the minute this guy, hundreds of kilometers, thousands of kilometers away, puts the ring on her finger, the guy back at home who appointed him as the agent is now married to this woman. He might not even know yet that it's happened. That's how powerful it is to be the agent of somebody else. It's that you're considered kemoisoi, you're considered like them. In other words, you're empowered by the person who appoints you to be their representative and agent. So let's circle back. We are called Hashem's shluchim. We're called Hashem's representatives. That means that the things that we're doing as Jewish people, every mitzvah that we do, the things that we avoid because they are transgressions, the Torah that we learn, we're not running just on our own steam. We're not just left to our own devices. We are, each one of us is a shliach of Hashem. We're a representative of Hashem. And the law is, shluchoi shel adam kemoisoi, that the minute you become the agent of somebody else, you essentially have their power. So if I'm Hashem's agent, it means I have Hashem's power. It's an incredibly revolutionary thought. So if it's just me taking a resolution, well, who knows how reliable I am. But if I am working as Hashem's representative, taking a resolution, that's a whole different story. That means that I'm now carrying some turbo in me that ordinary people don't have. Which means in really practical terms, if I say the diet starts tomorrow, there is absolutely zero guarantee that the diet will start tomorrow or that it will survive beyond Monday. There's no guarantees. Because at the end of the day, I'm human. And humans are fallible. And humans get distracted. And humans have bad days. There's absolutely no guarantee that that resolution is going to take. So I should be really careful. I should probably say, bli neder, that I'm doing this without the full commitment of a vow, because I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. Whereas if I say, I'm going to start learning some Torah every single day, then it's a lot more guaranteed. Why? Because at the end of the day, I'm not running just on my own resources. I'm representing Hashem, which means that I now have this boost, this drive that Hashem adds to the mix that allows me to progress in an unusual way. Now, that ties back to what we learned originally, where the Rambam told us that there are three categories of how you deal with fruit, as an example, that hasn't yet grown. The first category is, if I say to you, we're doing a transaction about the fruit that is not yet on my tree, it's not even the season yet, well, that's not binding, and either one of us could back out of that deal until the time that it actually comes to take the fruit. But we said, if we make a deal which says the tree is yours, and it's not really yours, but it's yours to the extent that you're permitted to take the fruit, we said in that case, you are allowed, it is binding, you do get the fruit, because I've made the investment greater than just an investment in an invisible future. But then we said that there's a third category. The third category we called hektish, which basically means if a person says, I am donating something in the future, either to tzedakah or to the Beis HaMikdash, we said that would be binding, because there's a difference between what we call hektish, which are things designated for holy purposes, and hedyot, which is things designated for ordinary purposes. Big difference. So if something is hedyot, if it's just person to person, human to human kind of interaction, then the engagement is very, very limited. But if it's hektish, the minute I've invoked Hashem and I'm saying I'm doing this for Hashem, which includes giving tzedakah, then everything changes, the laws change, and I'm allowed, and it's binding, to make a pledge about something that hasn't yet occurred. So if I say the animal that my other animal will produce, will give birth to, is going to be a sacrifice, that animal is now required to be a sacrifice. Or if I say, if this deal goes through, 10% is going to tzedakah, that's binding. That money now has to go to tzedakah. Now the question you have to ask yourself is, why? Why would that be the difference? Why is it that if it's just person to person, we've got to wait until things are real before we can actually transact on them? But if it's between person and Hashem, I don't have to wait for something to be real, and I can already transact on it now. And the answer should be self-evident. Because if there are two people trying to interact with each other, people are limited. And besides anything else, they are limited to the rules of the natural order. So in the natural order, we have no control over the future, right? We know that. We don't have control of what's going to happen in the next 30 seconds. Here it is, people are planning what they're going to do in 25 years from now. The reality is we literally have zero control of what's going to happen now. So if it is a natural relationship, one person to another person trying to make a deal about something that's going to happen in the future, nobody can be sure that those fruits are ever going to grow. We can't be sure that if they grow, that they're going to grow to maturity and ripen. We can't be sure that if they grow to maturity, that they're not going to be eaten by pests. We have zero control over the future. Therefore, logically, there is no way we could make a transaction that relates to the future and imagine that it should be binding. Because at the end of the day, it's just us. And we're just people, and people are extremely limited. But the minute I step into Hashem's realm, this is no longer just about people. It's no longer just about what I can and cannot control, what I can and cannot do. This is now about what Hashem can do. Well, Hashem is beyond the scope of nature. So if what I'm saying is, I want to do something for Hashem, which is a mitzvah resolution, either on the positive side, this is what I'm going to add in my spirituality, or on the negative side, this is a behavior that I'm going to desist from. I've now stepped into a completely different realm, and the rules are completely differently for two key reasons. Number one, I'm not operating as an individual, I'm operating as a shaliach. And the law is that if you are somebody else's shaliach, you are considered, in many respects, like them. In fact, there's a major analysis of this, which is very technical, of to what extent do you become like that person. And in that analysis, the highest level is that you become literally as if they were standing there. That's how deep this could go. So, interestingly, here we are saying that a tzaddik is the only one who's an eved, that is literally an extension of Hashem. But the truth is that if we are trying our best to be Hashem's agent, we, in a certain respect, also become like an extension of Hashem, which is incredibly powerful. Number two, because the realm in which I'm working is Hashem's business, giving tzedakah is Hashem's business. Pledging a mitzvah, which is the equivalent of saying my animal is going to become a sacrifice, because that would be a mitzvah, so we can extend it out to any other mitzvah that I pledge. I'm going to learn more, I'm going to say Tehillim, I'm going to daven, I'm going to put on tefillin every day, whatever the particular case might be. I've stepped out of the realm of the natural, and I've stepped into the realm of the godly. The minute I step into the realm of the godly, the golden rule of any spiritual development is, as the Gemara puts it, Any person who comes forward with an intention to purify, meaning to elevate their lives, to grow spiritually, Hashem helps. And when Hashem helps, then we are guaranteed a good outcome. And that's how we can have the, for lack of a better word, chutzpah, to make resolutions about our spiritual futures, because we're not saying I am some kind of a big deal who can guarantee what's going to happen in the future. We're saying quite humbly, Hashem has my back, and therefore the future is going to be, please God, successful. So we should keep that in mind next time we have to make a resolution, and we shouldn't be afraid of the impediments that the natural world might seem to throw at us, because the minute we make the resolution, we're actually dealing with the supernatural world.